is, okay, if humans were all ADHD and dyslexic, what the heck happened? Why are we a minority now? And why does nobody understand how to deal with us really? And why is this a new phenomenon that we have to have special learning programs in schools and these drugs and all this other stuff to take care of us?
Welcome back to Coffee with Bearded Bad Dad. Today, my guest with me is Bryan Rigg, and you've been on the podcast before, so you know how this goes. Let's get into it, man. The last time we talked, we had spoke a lot about your other books, but I wanted to get into a book you wrote called "Conquering Learning Disabilities at Any Age." And the reason why I'm so interested in this book in particular is because, well, I was just recently diagnosed with autism and I have ADHD. I was diagnosed with ADHD about 10 years ago. My kids have been diagnosed. Three of my boys have been diagnosed with ADHD, and two of them have been diagnosed with autism. So I am here to basically just talk to you about this book and ask you how it went and get into your experience with learning disabilities.
Oh, hey, thanks, Ricky. Thanks so much for having me back. It's good to see you. It's been a long journey, and the catalyst for writing the book is kind of a funny story. I was talking at an event in Fort Worth, and it was about my work, Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, about the Holocaust. And some people asked about my educational background, and since I was in Fort Worth, I was talking about a school that I went to after I failed first grade twice that really helped me a lot. That's associated with Texas Christian University, TCU. It's called Star Point. It's a lab school. Literally, it's a lab school for teachers to learn how to deal with kids with our genetic material, if you will, since you have ADHD and autism. And as I was talking about this, of course, a lot of the people knew about my educational accomplishments, that I went to Yale University, graduated with honors, got the Rhodes Henry Fellowship to go to Cambridge, where I got my master's and PhD. And at a afterward party, some people were kind of joking, like, yeah, if we could all be learning disabled like Rigg, we could go to Yale and Cambridge and so on. And that got me thinking, he's like, you know what? If I'm going to talk about my experiences and how I've been able to overcome them, I probably need to do some study into the reports about me as a kid. And my mom had taken me for several years to the Child Study Center in Fort Worth. And they focus on a lot of kids with learning behavioral issues. And there was a file in there, literally, for 4 years that they studied me from 1975 to 1979 and marked my progress and so on. And in this document, it says that I was MBD, minimal brain damaged. It got upgraded later on, minimal brain dysfunction. And then I was also HLD, hyperkinesis, learning disabled. Hyperkinesis just means, spastic and all over the place. And my mom had taken me there because I was very delayed in my speech. I wasn't really speaking until I was 3. I have a little daughter right now, and she started saying words when she was 8 months old. Now, obviously, she was just, echoing what mom and dad were saying to her, but, I had a hard time even with that. So this was in 2002, 2003 when I got the report, and when I was reading, I was like, God, man, I was really messed up. And I remember my then wife hitting me against the side of the head, so to speak. She's like, get over it. You've overcome it. You don't have to be devastated about what was written. And at the time, I had a little girl. I have two families. I'm an old dad now. I got blindsided by a divorce, which happens to a lot of people with ADHD and dyslexia,
Absolutely.
learning issues, which I'll talk about here in a second. After 20 years, swore I never get married again, but met this wonderful woman 5 years ago. We got married, and not only did we get married, we're having kids. But back then, when I got that report in 2002, 2003. I had a 2-year-old girl, and I just had the birth of my son. And I started thinking to myself, what happens to them if they get my genetic material? What were the lessons that I took as a kid that really helped me overcome my poor self-esteem, which a lot of people with these issues have? And what skill sets do they need to be taught to be successful in school?
Hmm.
And my then wife had a brother who was severely dyslexic and had a lot of other learning issues. So she knew she had some genetic material in her family. I'm also convinced that her mother side and her have autism. And my daughter actually has autism. She later got diagnosed because of just some of their behavioral quirks. Something
Yeah.
about autism, brilliant usually, but also don't have the common touch of human kindness.
Right.
There's a disconnect with the EQ there, emotional intelligence. So at this time, I got my child study report. I started reading books on learning disabilities. I became a disciple, if you will, of Ned Hallowell at Harvard University. We had both gone to the same prep school, Phillips Exeter Academy. And so that kind of gave me a kinship with him, although I did not know him at the time. He is now a friend, and he wrote the foreword to this book. He's at Harvard University. He's an expert in learning disabilities. For those of you interested in his work, his two excellent works are Driven to Distraction, Delivered from Distraction.
Okay.
Again, that's Dr. Ned Hallowell. So I started reading his book. I started reading Dr. Hartman's book about ADHD success stories. And then each one of my kids, as they got older, because you really can't diagnose this until they're around 5. But each kid, when they were getting around 5, getting ready to go to mainstream school, they started having issues. And we had this wonderful school here in Dallas called Shelton, which is a school for people with LD, learning differences now. They're much more gentler. I'm not calling it learning disabled.
Right.
And all my kids got their start there. And my daughter had severe problems with reading and speaking to some degree. My younger child, my second child at the time, Justin, he has severe ADHD and dyslexia. And so we started using different skill sets. We started using the natural diet, which I'll get into here in a second. And to make a long story short, because now my daughter is 25, my oldest boy is 23, my youngest is 18, and I can, say they are all extremely successful. My daughter has ADD, autism. My first boy has ADHD and dyslexia. And my younger boy has some form of ADD and anxiety. Um, so each one we had to focus on a lot. The first two, tremendously so, and did a lot of therapy. We did an all natural diet. We got him involved with sports. We used a lot of the things I'm going to talk to you about here in a second that helped me be successful. And my daughter got into the Duke tip program at the age of 12 when she was in sixth grade. She scored, I think, 1280 on the SAT. She scored higher
Wow.
than 50% of all juniors of that year. And that
Wow.
allowed her to get into the special Brainiac program at Duke. Later on, she took the SAT one time in high school and got a 1570. She went over to China on an exchange program, and in 9 months, she was fluent and she could read and write it.
Wow.
I actually went over to China with her when I was doing research for one of my books, and she was my translator.
That's
So
incredible.
yeah, so she's brilliant. And she's now an MMA Renaissance armor fighter, and she's supposedly the world champion in lightweight division. It's a small sport, but these people put 70 pounds of gear on, and they beat the crap out of each other. And that's one way of getting her exercise and whatnot. And she's a school teacher, teaching art to, I believe, elementary school age kids. My oldest son, he's in his third year of college. He's at Vanderbilt. He got a 1510 on the SAT. He's fluent in German. My younger boy, he got a 34 on the SAT, which is like a 1480 to a 1510 on the SAT. He's taken 9 years of Spanish. He's straight A's. He was captain of his football team.
Wow.
So they've all been very successful. So doing this book, I was looking at my own life, when I got this report going, okay, what helped me? And I interviewed a lot of my old teachers who were still alive 25 years ago and asked them about their techniques and so on, had them proofread the book along the way because it's gone through many drafts
Yeah.
until it was published a few years ago. And then I started studying, my own kids and realizing what works.
Right.
So this is what I found out after living this for 55 years and using my kids as guinea pigs, if you will, my first crop of three kids, and that they have been successful. I was on the board at Shelton for a while. I was on the board of Starpoint for a while. So I've got to see how the sausage is made as well.
Right.
So, the first thing I do in my book, which I think is very important for people with ADHD and dyslexia in particular, is to realize that this is part of the natural fabric genetically of Homo sapiens.
Right.
And in fact, my working theory, and I sent it over to Christopher Stringer, who wrote a wonderful book called Lone Survivors, talking about why, out of all the bipedal species, like Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, why did we survive and everybody else die off? What
Right.
was it about us? And so, since he was an expert on Homo sapiens, also other bipedal species, he's an expert on Neanderthals. I sent him this chapter and said, "Hey, am I on to something?" And he said, "Yes, you are." And what my thesis is basically everyone until the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, everyone was ADHD and dyslexic
Yes.
because it creates superior hunters and gatherers. Way of illustration. ADHD, a lot of kids and adults, the way they control it, they take Adderall or Ritalin. What these are is amphetamines. They're speed.
Yes.
It's basically giving the juice, giving somebody an extra kick so they can think normally because they are designed to have high adrenaline activity all the time.
Yes.
Perfect hunters when you're going out in the wild. That's why when I did research that the three communities that have the highest level of ADHD are fighter pilots, special forces, prison. Because if you
Really?
don't get that high adrenaline activity kick through positive activity, sports and so on,
Right.
you can go down the road of abuse, bad activity, crime, and so on. So that needs to be something that people need to realize. Okay, I have a need for high adrenaline activity. I am a superior hunter. Evolutionary wise, this ensured survivability of all my great grandparents and great great grandparents for the longest time. In fact, humanity should thank us for getting us to this point. And another example of why this theory is, I think, true is when you have it's core morbidity. Quite often, people with ADHD have dyslexia. Why is that? Well, my working theory is as a hunter, you got to have that drive and that energy to have high adrenaline activity, ADHD. And then dyslexia, you're flipping things on the page when you're reading.
Yeah.
Now, we did not create writing in reading, which is interesting. That's the next generation of Homo sapiens, which I'll get into. But flipping things on a page, you do the same thing when you're out in the wild. So when you're flipping a tree or a bush or the earth in your head, you're seeing the other side of detail. You're flipping
Right.
the image so you can track better. You can see where an animal was. You can see camouflage better in case an animal is trying to get you. And that's why you have it. And what's an interesting study I cited that the best astrophysicists, the guys who are looking through the telescopes, have dyslexia. Now go figure, they're good trackers and so
Yeah.
on. So then the question is, okay, if humans were all ADHD and dyslexic, what the heck happened? Why are we a minority now? And why does nobody understand how to deal with us really? And why is this a new phenomenon that we have to have special learning programs in schools and these drugs and all this other stuff to take care of us? Well, 10,000 years ago, we had maybe at the most worldwide 2 million people.
Right.
And that had been fairly static for a long time. Homo sapiens, according to like Francis Collins, Richard Dawkins, these are evolutionary biologists, geneticists. They believe we've been around for roughly around 200 100,000 years. So 10,000 years ago, after 190,000 years of being around, and one guy, I think I mean, his theory was, his name was Fred Windorf. He said about 20, 25,000 years ago, we almost died out. And the reason why we didn't is that a group of us from the Sahara Desert went up north in Europe and so on. And that's what saved us. So we have had populations that were even smaller than the 2 million, 10,000 years ago, 20, 30,000 years ago. He thinks this group of Homo sapiens that almost died out was only like 20, 30,000. So, it's been a razor edge for us for a long time.
Right.
So 10,000 years ago, we start growing our food and we have an explosion of populations because 100 acres can support 100 people if you grow crops on it, versus 100 acres if you hunt it, maybe can support 3 or 4 people because of the
Right.
animals. And according to studies that I cite in my book, the genetic material of mankind with this explosion of agricultural, societies has changed about 7 or 8%. And Hartman uses the term hunters and farmers. So
Okay.
ADHD and dyslexic people were the hunters, and then the farmers were these people that grew up out of the agricultural revolution, but they quickly dominated the landscape, and you had an explosion of populations, and you had the creation of city states, and you had the creation of language and writing. Now, there was a primitive form of language that we Homo sapiens had 10,000 years ago, but we hadn't codified it, written it. There wasn't a grammar necessarily attached to it. It was very
Right.
primitive. When you have city states and you have to communicate with people and you have to write laws and you have to do decrees and you have to keep, accounting records, then you have more sophisticated language and you have writing. Wasn't developed by us. It was developed by the farmers. And that's why we have such struggles with phonetics, with writing, with reading,
Yeah.
and with speaking. And so we are a unique branch of the Homo sapien population. And once people realize that they come from this people, that there's nothing wrong with them, that they ensured survivability of Homo sapiens, and that they have proclivities for certain professions like being EMTs, or trauma doctors, or fighter pilots, or special forces operators, Navy SEALs, and so on. Then you know how to direct those children and yourself, you know how to direct yourself in professions where you'll feed your ego, you'll be successful, and you know what you have a proclivity for. I
Yes.
know I'll never be a nuclear engineer, scientist. I know I'll never be an architect. It's too boring for me,
Right.
and for me to be pushed in that direction by my family if they didn't know who I was would be disastrous. And so a
Yes.
lot of people feel like they need to fit into a mold, a lot of times the ADHD, and they get really frustrated quickly. And quite often you see that in the classroom because passive learning, a teacher lecturing, is a farmer invention. Hunter teaching was with a father, grandfather, an uncle, and older brother, one-on-one mentoring, interactive, back
Yeah.
and forth. So you need to get these kids who have ADHD in a Socratic method type of classroom where there's interaction and there's feedback and there's flow of conversation. That's the way they stay engaged. Our traditional classrooms are a killer for them.
Yes.
So the first part of my book, the first area of success is the worst learning disability is poor self-esteem. So a lot of these kids who think they're learning disabled or they're a freak. I was called a moron, an idiot, a freak when I was young because I couldn't do a lot of things that the other kids did. You can develop obviously a very poor self-esteem, and kids are like little wolves when they're young. They don't know any better, but they do pick on each other all the time. And if you have a big L on your forehead for loser, they're going to let you know it, or what you feel as a loser. So the first thing is letting the kids know that they're not a freak, they're not abnormal, they're not different, they're unique, they're strong, they're creative, and usually ADHD also has something that gives for hunting, but it can translate into other things, and that's imagination.
Yes.
So usually ADHD people are extremely creative. They're usually really funny and zany, and they're usually the life of the party, you know. So this is something else that you encourage the self-esteem of what people are strong with. You know, maybe they're going to be a thespian, an actor, you know, and so on. So once you get that under control, that's the first part of my book is like, okay, we are unique. We're not freakish. We're not defective, and we have this type of brain. Okay. Now we get that out of the way. Now, how do we handle it? Well, I've already kind of gone into the pedagogic techniques that having interactive classrooms is key. The second thing that I found that's very interesting is that everybody is sensitive to a certain degree to artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
seems like ADHD and dyslexic kids are more so. And there was a brilliant doctor, and there's some controversy out there if you look him up. But basically, if you read his books, which I have, my mom met him, set up one of his chapters here. His name was Benjamin Feingold. And Feingold's theory was just simple. He said, when I have a whole bunch of kids in a room and I give them Jello and Kool-Aid versus a whole bunch of other kids in another room and I give them carrots and orange juice, the kids who are given Kool-Aid and the Jello, they're Tasmanian devils usually after 5 or 10 minutes. But the kids that I don't give this to, they seem to be fairly normal, high energy,
Yeah.
but you can talk to them and so on. And what he found, especially red dye, and which is interesting, RFK is very controversial. But one thing that he's done that I think is very good is that he said no more red dyes. Because the
Absolutely.
research shows it's not good. And the research I've done for a long time, it is not good. Now, what's interesting about artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives, and this is why I think it affects ADHD and dyslexic people so much. When you look at these chemicals, they're petroleum based and they mimic neurotransmitters of serotonin and dopamine.
I
So,
didn't
what
know
do
that they were.
ADHD people crave? They crave high adrenaline activity.
Yeah.
So, that's kicking in the serotonin and dopamine. So that's all that's going on. So when you give kids that are already craving this and need it on a daily
Yeah.
basis, and you give them chemicals in their body that mimic these neurotransmitters, it's like static in the brain. It makes them even more hyperactive than they already are, and that's why they have a hard time learning and sitting down. When my mom did this diet on me, the child study report that was following my progress saw a marked improvement with my cognitive abilities, my self-esteem, and my
Really.
school performance. So the way I present this to parents is, in our age of instant gratification, a lot of people don't even read the ingredients of the food. They just buy it, cereal. But BMT, which is in a lot of cereal, it's like a derivative of formaldehyde. It's what we use to embalm
Really.
people with. It's also a petroleum-based product. It prevents beetles and rotting, which is a
Wow.
good thing. I mean, a lot of these chemicals were put into the food supply, especially in World War II, to make sure it was preserved. Well, what is a good preserver? Oil.
Yeah.
It doesn't rot, olive oil and things of that sort. So, unfortunately, they weren't using olive oil. They were using petroleum because of the ample amounts that we had. And we're not designed to eat it.
Right.
So the way that I present it to people is like, okay, start reading the ingredients. Only get cereal like Cheerios or Raisin Bran that doesn't have BHT. Um, make sure you don't have artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives. A lot of people buy pickles and you don't even realize yellow dyes put in to make them look more appealing to
Really.
the eye. Yeah. So
I didn't
get
know that.
kosher, pickles and make sure they don't have yellow dye in them. You will see a difference. I felt a difference, but the scientists back in my life saw it. And Benjamin Feingold, he also saw marked improvements with his kids. Now it was anecdotal, and that's why the scientific community would kind of throw away his studies because he didn't do a double-blind placebo. He just brought the kids in, realized what they were eating, changed their diet, and saw a big
Right.
improvement. And so I did the same thing with my kids. I put them on an all natural diet, made sure they ate well. And then it was a very easy argument. Hey, we are what we eat. The better your food is, the better you will be. Your teeth won't get rotten, and so on. It's kind of an interesting story I always make people laugh with. I took my daughter when she was, I believe, 5, and my son 2.5, trick-or-treating. I want them to enjoy the holiday. We didn't eat most of the stuff. We threw out most of the stuff. Mounds and almonds, I believe, are the two type of candies that are all natural. They have coconut in it and so on. So we would let them eat
Yeah.
natural candy. And so when we would go to Europe, they could eat a lot of the stuff there. We weren't draconian with doing away with all junk food, but we did a very good job of staying away from artificial food. So anyway, we're about a month before the trick-or-treating. My daughter asked me, Daddy, why do we not eat artificial flavors, colors, and preservatives? And we're driving the car, and I said, well, sweetheart, first of all, it's not good for you. You know, it messes up your system. We're not designed for it. Also, Daddy had a lot of problems when he was young, when he ate this stuff, of controlling his anger, of controlling his emotions, because it was, it was stimulating me in ways that I shouldn't. And so we just don't eat it. So she soaked that all in. Now we go trick-or-treating a couple months later. First house we go to, she goes, trick or treat. Do you have anything that's not artificial? The people are like, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I think this is all I have. And I said, sweetheart, just take what's given and we'll look at it later on at home. Well, we get to about the 20th house and a woman comes out with a big bowl. It's very sweet. And Justin, my younger boy, starts getting greedy, taking, multiple handfuls. I was like, son, only take one handful. There's other trick-or-treaters around here. Don't be selfish. And she's like, that's okay. Take some for your daddy. And without missing a beat, my daughter in the background pipes up, make sure it's not artificial because if it is, my daddy can't control his anger. And the
That's
woman's
so
like, let's hope he
precious.
grows out of it. And I was thinking, well, child protective services are going to be at my doorstep when I get back. But
Yes.
you got to have the kids buy into it. So what my mom did a lot of times when I stayed on my diet, because at vacation Bible school or school, they would have Jello and Kool-Aid and Lucky Charms and so on for us. Especially during the lunch lines. Well, when I was able to prove, if you will, every day for 7 days in a row that I hadn't gone off my diet, I get something special reward. I may get a Lego set. I may be able, and I had a lot of other chores that I had to do. It wasn't just my diet, but diet was part of it. My mom had a big grid, and at the end, a reward was given of activity, going to the zoo, being able to go over to a friend's house, have a friend spend the
Yeah.
night. If I violated it, I got those taken out. And the school Star Point where I was at did the same thing. They had no grades. You worked at your own pace, and throughout the week, you got little plastic chips for a good activity that you did, and you had to get a certain amount. So let's say you were rambunctious in recess and you knocked a kid over. Well, everybody else would get a little chip, but you wouldn't because you hurt somebody and you weren't paying
Right.
attention. It didn't have situational awareness. And you had to get something like 35 little chips every week to do something special at the end of the week. And since we were at the university, they would take us to the football stadium and get to play flag football there. Or we would go to the Olympic sized pool and be able to go swimming and diving, there.
Yeah.
These are things. And if you didn't get those chips, you had to stay in the classroom and do homework. So here again, instead of getting licks, which is what I got early on at other schools where I failed first grade twice, um, now it was if you perform well, you get privilege.
Yeah.
If
Positive
you
and negative reinforcement.
and don't get hit. I had one of my teachers that spanked me a lot read this, and he apologized. He's like, "That's just the way we were trained back in the
Yeah.
70s to give licks. Now we didn't realize it was not good." And I failed first grade twice, so I already had a bullseye on my head within the school that I was a problem child.
Right.
So, here again, important for people to know with what I've learned, where we come from, how you learn best, interactive learning, if you can get that. If you have the resources, and especially now with a lot of societies allowing people to use their tax dollars to go to private schools,
Yes.
usually private schools have smaller classrooms. And so they're better. Also, they're not having an agenda, which a lot of public schools they have to teach to the test. And a lot
Right.
of times the test is not conducive to ADHD dyslexic people. So that's another
And
reason.
it's like 5 hours long for each section, and then you got 20 sections. It takes like a week and a half to go through that standardized testing.
Yeah, so yeah, perfect point in case. Another thing people need to have back in their brain housing group is a lot of girls fall through the cracks of being diagnosed because
Yes,
they're not as rambunctious. So if your kid is struggling, usually you're like, well, hey, just suck it up or let's work at home and so on. Um, the first thing you should probably do is try to get the kid tested if they're struggling and see if they have it because girls have been so highly undiagnosed. And the later you are diagnosed and then start working the problem, the harder it is to correct it. Like
yes,
adults with ADHD and dyslexia, when they get diagnosed, much harder. No, no offense, Ricky. You're my friend. And thank God you've been proactive. Some people don't do it their whole lives and suffer.
absolutely.
But once you realize what you have and then you can start working the problem, it's very important to do so. But girls are highly undiagnosed in this area, but they have it just as much, but they're just ADD. They don't usually have the hyperactivity aspect because of just their genetics, but they also have dyslexic because they also have this skill set to be able to pass it on to their children that
Yeah,
ensure survivability of the Homo sapien population. Now, this is what's important to know. Unfortunately, in our society, we have problems with pedophiles.
right.
1 in 8 boys are attacked by the time they get to adulthood, and 1 in 4, according to some studies. 1 in 4 girls. So, why do I bring this up? A lot of the behavior of a child mimics ADHD and dyslexia, if you will, who have been sexually abused.
I did
So,
not know that.
yeah, especially in girls. So, when you start having problems, Uh, part of the process you need to be thinking about when you get your kid screened is she's 6 or 7 or whatnot. Let's make sure nothing's happened to her physically, that
Right,
her self-autonomy has been violated, because then there's a whole new set of therapy that you need to be implementing to take care of that child
right.
versus learning disability because she may not have or he may not have a natural learning disability genetically.
It
He or
may be
she may
like a
be
trauma
perfectly
response.
fine in this area. The reason why they're acting out or they're distracted and so on is that they've been violated and they're hurting and they've been traumatized and they don't know how to deal with it and heal from it. So that's something else that I bring out in my book that's very important for people to be mindful of. So they're working the problem properly with the proper professionals.
Right.
Now, getting back to the diet, I am not a medical doctor. Ned Hallowell, who's a good friend of mine who wrote the foreword of my book, is a medical doctor and he is an expert in ADHD. He does agree with me with the following: medication is too often the first line of defense, it's
I am
too often
almost,
given.
brother, I am almost anti-medication these days.
Well, and I am too, because they tried Ritalin on me for 6 months and it was horrible. My mom said I looked like I was suffering from rickets. I lost my drive in life and so on. Now, granted, here again, I'm not a medical doctor. Some people, I'm sure it helps an awful lot. But if you can control it through all natural means, why not do so? Also, there's some interesting studies out there that rightly or wrongly, if you're correcting a problem with your child with a drug, you're giving them a pill and you're removing the responsibility from themselves.
Yes. Yes.
So,
I am you're preaching to the choir on that one. So I preach to pretty much everybody I know. Like so my middle son, he's on a medication currently for his ADHD, and I'm not his only parent. So I have to share responsibilities with mom, and also he's 16 years old, so he kind of gets a say
yeah.
too. And so I say no to the medications, and I have let my opinions and stuff be known on that. And but I told my family members, I said, now listen, I'm kind of biased on this stuff. I have my own opinions. You guys go talking to the professionals. You do the studies or do the studying and research and talk with the doctor. You guys make up your own mind. I'm going to recuse myself from this, but just know how where I stand. And with that, so my middle son is on medication, but I've told my wife, I've told him, I've told everybody, like, listen, I don't want you to have to depend on this medication. I want you to be okay to go to school if you miss a dose. I don't want you to lean on it on the medication as a crutch. And ultimately, just know that these medications are very, very expensive. And when you become an adult, you're going to have to figure out how to do things without mind altering substances, because once this stops working, you'll have to move to something else. Once that stops working, you'll have to move to something else, and it's a never ending cycle.
Hmm.
And so I've often preached. I've not really got into the dieting, the food, all that much, but we have noticed marked improvement with all of my kids once we started eating more naturally.
And I have in my book, I have multiple articles that endorse this philosophy and this methodology that's based on science. A good friend of mine who's head of nutritional science, or she's one of the head professors of nutritional science at Brooklyn College, she's a big promoter of this, and she's shown that the principles of the Fine Gold diet work very well. Now, a lot of people might be saying, "Hey, after a pee-wee football game or at a kid's birthday party, I don't want the kid to be excluded." Well, my
Yeah.
mom had a very simple solution. After the pee-wee football game, she had orange juice there for me, so I could drink
Yes.
that with my friends who were drinking Dr. Pepper. At a birthday party, she cooked a special cake for me that I could have so I could participate in the birthday party with my friends and then feel like I was left out. But all natural icing, all natural ingredients, and so on. So my mom was really big into that. And now with Whole Foods and other sprouts and so on, you can find all natural uh,
Absolutely.
cakes and so on. So I'm a big proponent of no drugs. Now, like I said, Dr. Ned Hallowell, he says in some cases it does help people, but he also agrees it's too often the first thing. I mean, I think it's no news flash to America that were too pill focused and pill driven.
Yes.
And the fentanyl craziness that we had. And, luckily now it's come down because the border's being more secure. But I mean, we were having 60,000 of our people
Yeah, I think there's
dying
still a
because of fentanyl.
I think the demand is just as high as it ever was. It's just the availability's gone down.
Well, and that's a good way of doing it. Take it away,
Yeah.
and so I think doctors are not trained diet wise. They rarely take nutritional science courses. My ex-father-in-law is a famous heart surgeon, Dr. Paul Stelzer. He told me when he was at Columbia University, they didn't take one course on nutrition in the 60s
Not
and
one?
70s. Not one. He didn't know. He was horrid with his diet until just recently. He was basically on the borderline of becoming full diabetic if he didn't change his
Yeah.
diet. He would drink a Coke and have a Snickers bar before he would go to work that day. Brilliant surgeon, one of the greatest valve surgeons out there, horrible with diet. So a lot of these doctors we go to help us with our ADHD and dyslexia and learning issues, they're not trained in diet and
Yeah.
physical fitness and so on. So I think the two things that are really the combination of natural diet and exercise. The research out there is overwhelming that when people do at least an hour of exercise a day, they don't need to take their Ritalin and their Adderall and so on.
Absolutely.
So that's another thing that, get your kids involved with sports, which my mom was brilliant in getting me involved with many sports growing up. And I did that with my kids. Hence what, my daughter now is this MMA world champion, Renaissance armor, MMA fighting. And, my second child, my first son, he was a Division I recruit in rowing. Did rowing for many years until unfortunately he herniated a disc, bless his heart. And then my younger boy, captain of a football team that won the 6A private school championship this year. You know,
And there's so many tertiary benefits from being involved in sports teams and especially the teamwork aspect of it, but not only the teamwork aspect, but the camaraderie and the how do I say the congregation of just getting together with a group of friends and exercising or playing a game, doing sports, and all that good stuff. Team sports is really an excellent it's an excellent way to get you ready for a lifetime of having to work with other people.
Amen. I think that's one because my current wife is Swedish, and I've lived in Germany, and they are successful societies by and large. But one thing that I see that's different in America than there is the people on average are not as driven.
Right.
There's a socialized medicine, socialized system. You can't earn as much. You don't get this hunger that you get from a lot of Americans. And I believe it's because we have sports in the schools. See, if you want to do a sport, you have to do it in a club. Now, granted, when the kids are little, you're doing clubs, but when they get to
Right.
junior high, and especially when they get to high school, it's school spirit, everybody getting involved, and everybody knows you, and you got that camaraderie. And I think that competition, that learning to work with each other, overcoming obstacles and so on, is part and parcel of our success as Americans. I wish we had the draft as well because I would see that as another layer of learning how to work together and giving back to democracy before you
So
take
I've
from it.
talked about that on the podcast before many times. Instead of like a draft, like a mandatory military service, I'd be more apt to sign up for like a mandatory humanitarian service.
Yeah, like Doctors Without Borders, Smile
Absolutely.
Train,
So that way
Peace
you get the
Corps.
experience of outside of our borders, but you get to experience just how lucky we are to have been born here. And I think that um seeing adversity that we would never run into up close and personal, I think that would be a boon for everyone. But not only that, but a mandatory service of some kind. You remembered like the presidential fitness tests that we
Yep.
used to have to do. Like when that went away, like we had nothing but a bunch of fat kids. And I say that as a fat person, ladies and gentlemen. So, hey, it is what it
Well, we
is.
do. I mean, like 50% of our kids are under the BMI
Yes.
measurements are considered obese. So, I mean, that would be something that would help. And the interesting thing is Germany had a nice model. They don't have it anymore, but they had what you had. They would give the kids an option. Okay, you can do military service. Or you can do a civil service where you're taking care of orphanages or juvenile
Yeah.
detention centers or retirement centers. You're helping society in some form or fashion before you go out to it. And then Finland has military service. Israel, and I've served in the Israeli military. They have this, and it is amazing. The
You served in
maturity.
the Israeli military?
Yeah, I was in the Israeli army before the Marine Corps.
We didn't talk about that. That's
Yeah.
interesting. But back
Yeah,
on
so you bring
topic.
these kids, yeah, you bring these kids all together from all different walks of life, and within 12 weeks of training, they love each other. They have contact with people they would have under other circumstances would have never had contact with,
Yeah.
and it's physically strenuous. If you are not in shape, they give you extra time. Also, in Israel, it's really great if you come there and they find that there was a defect in your high school education, then they'll keep you on for another 3 months, 6 months, and teach you the math you need or the language
That
skills you
is
need.
awesome.
Yeah, and so you have a better, citizenship out there to draw upon, to vote, and to be productive citizens. So coming full circle, doing these activities for ADHD and dyslexic people, Boy Scouts or Sea Cadets or Young Marines, all these different youth programs that you can be part of that make you intellectually stimulated, but learn about the group. And then, of course, basketball, soccer, football,
Yeah.
baseball, softball, volleyball, very important, very key. In fact, if parents are listening today and they're thinking, okay, what are the two things I can do to most help my kid? All natural diet, sports.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So I have a Russian friend who grew up in the USSR, and he moved here somewhere around 99 2000. And so he has children both in Russia and here. And we had actually gotten into a conversation about, the differences between Russia and the United States. And that was one of the things that he brought up. You had brought up sports. Well, he had brought up like mandatory service. And he's like, over there, that's what we had. But when he was talking to me about like, because obviously we had gotten into a conversation about my kids and ADHD and autism, and it's very interesting. He had told me something similar. He's like, get him into sports as soon as possible. And I was like, what about the younger one here? And he's like, martial arts. He's like, if they're too young for sports, get them in martial arts because it's something. And we diving further into that, he had expressed that it's not the mandatory part that you got to pay attention to. It's the benefits that come from it, the tertiary benefits that come from the mandatory service or sports or whatever. And he's like, and if they don't like it, it's every sport is not going to be for every person. So if they don't like this thing, try something different.
Yeah,
If they
I
don't,
did that
and
all the time. I mean, my
yeah,
daughter was horseback riding, archery, martial arts, kung fu. And
yeah,
so, my boys have all been basketball, football, baseball, soccer, and then they just gravitate to, something that they like. Crew, I was exposed to it up in the Northeast, and it's a great, team sport. It does a number on your back, though. You got to have some cross training. So, I think doing multiple sports is something important throughout the season. There's a lot of research now that we are too hyper focused of getting a kid involved with one sport, or
yes,
maybe he or she shows some proclivity for that one sport. So then you do club sports all year round, and doing that one repetitive activity actually wears out the joints.
yeah.
Uh,
Most of my favorite athletes, professional athletes, most of them are multiple sport athletes.
David Robinson, and well, David
Patrick
Robinson was just he
Mahomes
was
is
he was a military guy, but Bo Jackson, I guess, is who I think of.
Yeah, Bo Jackson was another one. Patrick Mahomes, who is the quarterback for my Kansas City Chiefs, he actually was drafted to a baseball team before he was drafted to an NFL team. And he was drafted, I can't remember who he was drafted by, but he was drafted to a baseball team when he was 16 years old.
Oh
And it was
wow! Well, his
very
dad was a
interesting.
professional baseball player, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And then when he signed with the Kansas City Chiefs, something interesting happened. He was out on the court playing pickup basketball, right? And he was actually pretty damn good at basketball. So um, they had to write it into his contract that he could no longer play pickup games of basketball because there's too many
Injuries.
opportunities to get hurt. And so I thought that was very interesting. Not only is he good at basketball, but he got drafted to a major league baseball team at 16 years old. Not only that, but he didn't start playing football until his like sophomore year of high school. And now here he is, the highest paid quarterback in the league. There's conversations. There's a conversation that could be had that he may be the greatest football player that ever lived so far. But right now, if he retired tomorrow, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. And he's a three sport, and not only just three sports, he's great at golf too.
Yeah, and unlike a lot of the guys out there that are famous, it seems like he's a decent human being. He's a good
Absolutely.
father. He's a good husband. He's a good leader. most of these guys are south end of northbound mules, and it's just irritating. A lot of the NBA players, they just are
Yes.
not very nice individuals, or WNBA players too. I mean, for that matter.
Yeah. That Caitlin Clark shot, I never
Well,
really paid
Caitlin Clark,
attention.
is the one example. She's very. It's almost like if you're not, it seems like in this case, you're getting you get a feel that they are being racist toward her because she's white and she's
Yes.
not a lesbian.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Now I had a friend that was on the Yale basketball team, and like more than half of the team were lesbians, and she was being pressured into being one, and she got so fed up with it that she just quit. And I've
Wow.
heard that female basketball has a problem with that as you get up to the higher leagues, that there's almost like this like bully lesbian aspect. I'm sure there's a
Really?
sociologist out there that studied this. I hear about it all the time from a
Yeah.
lot of my college friends who have women in the basketball genre. You seem to have that problem.
That's very interesting. I'm gonna have to dive into that because um
Well, it's
I'm a
like
very
there's some people that graduate. I mean, you don't hear it really in the like the gay aspect, like, if
right.
in the modeling career, I mean, I had a friend that was in there and he was heterosexual and almost everybody was gay. I had another friend that was a ballet dancer. And you don't get that bully aspect, but it's interesting. A lot of I'm thinking of three girls that I've talked to. They said they were bullied. So it's kind of
Really?
interesting that in this respect, the one good person that we're really finding in WNBA is
Yeah.
kind of like against all the stereotypes of what you think of a professional female. Um,
Right.
and then getting to Mahomes, a lot of quarterbacks throughout the years have not been nice people. I mean, Roger Staubach was a good guy. Tom Brady seems like a fairly decent,
Tom Brady's
decent
awesome,
dude.
man. I love that
Yeah,
guy.
yeah,
Love that
and
guy.
Mahomes, I mean, he'd be a guy I like to really hang out with and have a.
Yes.
And he's done, and it looks like he's breaking the generation because it looks like his dad is a horrible human being. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I don't know much about his dad, but he keeps getting in trouble and it really makes you like it it makes me glad that I don't have anybody in my life that doesn't really think about those things. Like his dad should, the first thing on his mind shouldn't be his son, but that's one of those things that like you're an old enough person, like you should understand the things that you do affects others, and
And you, of
because of
all people, who was a professional athlete.
yes, you should know, and you should know how much it means to like how much the public is focusing on your kid through the lens of like what you do.
Yeah,
And
one
I'm
of the biggest disappointments is we're on this, and and some of this I believe is undiagnosed or untreated ADHD, like with his
yeah,
dad and so on. Because to get to that level, a lot of times professional athletes are ADHD dyslexia. Because think about it, you have to be a good hunter,
yes,
being a
yes.
linebacker and whatnot, so on. I'm convinced that Lawrence Taylor, one of the greatest linebackers ever, but a
LT.
horrible human being, is off the charts ADHD. I don't know if there's records out there
Well, and
or,
then
or not.
there's that one guy, Antonio Brown. He
Oh
went
yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, just not, but the person that's been the biggest disappointment in my life, because I saw so much potential for him doing so much good, and he's so intelligent, but he just continues to do such stupid things, and that's Tiger Woods.
Oh my gosh, yes.
What an
Oh my
idiot with his
gosh, yes.
wife and sexual addiction, and then now the drugs. He has these kids that he's mentoring. He got so many people involved in golf, and he got a lot of people, minorities, that would have never got into golf because he was
Yep.
one. He was one of the first one. He was the spokesman. Now he is a human being. We all have flaws. We're all
Right.
struggling and so on. But not to put two and two together that, hey, you have to be this much more careful. So you have the money. Why don't you have people that hold you accountable
Yes.
so you
Yes.
don't do this stupid stuff? Because I'm sure if you look at it, the potential of how much money he lost in divorce and endorsements and everything else because of the shitty life he's lived,
Yes.
that is more than that hopefully would motivate somebody to stop, you
Yeah, I
know?
think he lost a Nike contract the last time he got in trouble, and like it's wild because you see John Daly, who is he's an outsider, he's an outcast. I think the guy's hilarious, but I hear he's an asshole. But
Mhm.
you see him, he gets suspended from the PGA Tour from for public intoxication, and then nothing happens to Tiger Woods. Nothing happens to him. And now he's going to get out. I don't know if he's doing much of anything in the eyes of golf. I quit following him. I don't really follow golf all that much, but it seems like he might duck out of trouble this time because he's committed to going to treatment. And
Well,
and
I
and
don't
that's
know.
he should have went to
The one,
treatment 20 years ago.
yeah. I mean, it doesn't seem to do very much, but it looks like the deathly or tripled connection here is that he had opiates and alcohol, and he was driving.
Yes. Yes. But
So
he's
I mean,
also friends with our current president now. So, I mean, it's going to get
well,
weird.
I mean,
It's,
like he's dating his ex daughter-in-law. You know, a lot of these type of personalities, coming back to the theme of our talk today, I do believe it is the high adrenaline activity that when people know they have that, we can see what bad behavior, taking opiates, drinking, and driving, like a maniac through the neighborhood. Which try or like Tiger, I don't know how he was able to. He has this beautiful, gorgeous wife with two little kids, and he's having sex with like 20 women
yes.
on a rotating cycle. I mean, here again, high adrenaline activity, very destructive behavior, and this is something else I go into my book. A lot of people need to do, I think, extra marriage counseling who have ADHD for two reasons. One is to realize they have a proclivity for ADHD. I mean, for affairs. Now, what's ironic, my first marriage, and this is public knowledge, she is very left brain, very farmer like, and so on. But she's the one that had the affair that broke up the marriage. But this is something that affects a lot of people with ADHD because it's not necessarily the affair that they're falling in love with another woman. It's the thrill of the hunt.
Yeah, the
It's the high
dopamine.
adrenaline activity and so on, and also other bad activity like drinking and doing drugs and so
You know
on.
what? Something I identified that I used to do. I probably still do it at some point. I used to pick fights with my wife for the dopamine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with what's going on, and I guess that was the problem. And as
And
soon
when
as
you
she'd
know it,
ask me, "What is wrong with you? What's the problem?" and I'd think about it, and I'm like, "Nothing. I guess I just wanted to be an asshole today."
yeah.
And then we'd move on.
Well, no, what you need to probably say is like, hey, I should have gone on two hunts this morning, and then I would have had my adrenaline kick, and I'd be relaxed now around the fire, and you could give me my mead, and we would be eating the rabbit. You know, I
Yes.
mean, once you know this, then you know what to defend against. And
Yes.
ADHD people, one thing that's very interesting is usually they marry people who are very un-ADHD like.
Really?
Yeah,
I
the
think
research
my
out there
wife and
shows
I
that
are
quite
very
often
similar.
men, yeah, men who are ADHD quite often marry women who are not.
That's
And
very
what
interesting.
naturally attracts them to the ADHD person at the beginning is the zaniness, the spontaneous, behavior, the thinking out of the box and so on, but eventually it drains them. So that's something that you need to be very mindful of, that what you love about them and what you hate about them is the same thing. And that's kind of universal in many relationships. But with ADHD, people like you and I, we got to do everything we can to keep our wives on this side of the line. That
Yes.
they think we're crazy and cool and funny and whatnot. And so, like you knowing a stupid trigger point that you have, then hopefully you defend against that because that's not your wife's fault. And
Yes.
that's going to tear away your emotional connection with her. And so that's something else I go into the book, and I use my own divorce with my first wife of 20 years as an example of what maybe could have helped us. Now, some people are just they grow apart. Some people are not meant to get married.
Right.
And of course, thank God we have a society where you're allowed to divorce and so on. So I'm not
Yes.
saying necessarily that Stephanie and my ex-wife, should have stayed together. I'm much happier now with the wife I have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're 5 years into it. Hopefully I'll be able to say that in 20 years because we all change. But right now, I mean, it's a better wife for me, a better mother for my children. And you know, probably because of the first experience, I'm better at it now.
Yeah.
So I have to thank my ex-wife for that. But I go in the book, I was like, divorce is horrible, especially with little kids. Do everything you can to keep the relationship together. And if you find yourself in this situation that I found myself in, that I'm an ADHD guy, and suddenly I have a person who doesn't like the ADHD anymore.
Yeah.
What could I have done to have prevented that? And I go through a lot of research of what people can do to keep their relationships healthy when they know they have this ADHD, because we're not easy.
Yes. One thing that's really helped me, Bryan, and I don't, not to get too far off subject, but one thing that's really helped me is find something to micromanage so I don't have to micromanage my life. And what I mean by that, I just recently started growing cannabis, my own cannabis, last year. And I've, it's so learning intensive. It's a very long process to learn. You have to buy a bunch of crap. You have to, buy a bunch of equipment and do a bunch of research. But I found myself diving deep into it. And the more I get into it, and the growing process and everything is, so you have to micromanage it to get it to be perfect. And I found that as I'm micromanaging my garden, I stopped micromanaging my life, and everyone in my house is happier because I'm not on their ass. I'm not being overbearing, or I'm not mentioning things over and over again. Have you done this? Have you done that? And I've taken more of a proactive approach in making things easier for my family, because the easier it is for them, it's easier for me. And I
Yeah,
think,
and yeah,
go ahead.
you're getting your adrenaline kick. And,
Exactly.
and that's the hyper focus. So ADHD and dyslexic people have this superpower called being hyper focused. Now, a lot of people
Yes.
think scatterbrains, that we're attention deficit. No, it's that we're
Yes.
paying attention to everything, because here, once again, Hunter, you're scanning everything to see, okay, when do I see the animal and I'll go after it. And
Exactly.
once you need to go after it, then you can get very hyper focused, and that helps burn a lot of energy and adrenaline. So whatever an ADHD person can find that gets him or her hyper focused during the day, and that might be playing sports, that might be, doing a garden or whatnot, then they're much nicer people later on once they got that
Yes.
hyper focus out of the way.
Absolutely.
They
And
got
then
their adrenaline kick.
once you get that hyper focus out of the, it seems to like relax the brain a little bit, so we're not focusing on so much all
Yeah,
at one time.
yeah.
And
So that's
another thing
also,
that I've identified that I do a lot is I seek out the hard stuff, anxiety inducing things like, um, if I don't, like, I'm not really a people person, so to speak. I love my alone time. Again, I just found out that I have autism, which it all makes sense now. But I lean into things that are difficult for me. I lean into things that give me anxiety because I get kind of a high from it. And I lean into the difficult things. If I don't want to do something, I identify why I don't want to do it. And if it's a silly little reason like, oh, I just I don't want to be anxiety ridden or whatever, I just do the hard thing. And then afterwards, it's like I did the hard thing and I'm very proud of myself and it gives me a boost. And I just don't know how to explain it any other way than if you think something's difficult, or don't stop just because it's difficult, don't stop just because it gets hard, lean into it and you might find that you get a little bit of satisfaction from it.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I think a lot of people who have our brains are paratroopers, pilots,
Absolutely.
astronauts, et cetera, et cetera.
I love roller coasters. Like
Yeah.
I'm one of the things that I really love to do with my kids is go park hopping or uh, different theme parks all over the country. And I loved roller coasters enough to where when my kids wouldn't ride them with me, I rode them by myself to get that thrill. And then now my kids are they all love roller coasters and we all ride them together. And it's a wonderful thing that we can all do together, provided my body holds out and I don't hurt my back any more than it already is. But
Hmm.
it's fascinating, these things that we can identify across the ADHD community, or learning disabilities in general, that bring us can bring us closer together and we can figure out how to help each other. And your book points out the a lot of the things that I've thought about and I just didn't educate myself about. And one of the biggest ones is the food. I don't think we can talk about that enough, because the diet, I had weight loss surgery back in 2020. I think it was 2020. I was
Hmm.
520 pounds, man,
Oh my
at my
God,
heaviest.
Rick.
Yes. And I lost
How tall are
300
you?
pounds, 6 foot.
6 foot.
Yeah.
So
So
that's
I was a
still.
big boy. And a lot of people said I didn't look like I weighed that much, but I felt it. I struggled just to go to the bathroom and I felt like I was just waiting around to die. So I
Hmm.
had weight loss surgery and they say that's the easy, a lot of people say that's the easy way out or whatever. No, I'm telling you, it's not. It was difficult. But I lost 300 pounds and I felt better, not only physically, but mentally too. And then I came off my diet not too long ago and I started just feeling like shit all the time. And then I'm like, you know what? I bet it's what I'm eating.
Hmm.
And we switched up what we're eating and I'm back to like what I consider like a baseline now. I feel good when I wake up. I don't breathe funny when I go to the, when I'm walking across the room or something. And it's like we don't realize exactly how bad we feel because when we put in these poisons in our body, it takes a slow, it's slow going, it over time you just feel like crap. And then you begin to feel like, well, this is normal, this is what I'm supposed to feel like. No, it's not. I'll be 41 in 2 weeks and I have so much more energy now in my 40s than I did in my 20s because I was so big when I was 20, you know?
Right, and that's the curse of our genetics. Once again, we are in a famine state all the time
Yeah,
because for the longest time we didn't have salts and sugars and fats and and especially when we were hunter gatherers,
right.
you're eating very lean meat and you're having to work hard to get it. And when you can get a lot of it, like the Native Americans would do with the buffalo, you did your best to preserve it because it wasn't always going to be around, and starvation was a danger. So now that we have plentiful salts and sugars, what we don't realize is when we eat some sugar, the brain's like, "Oh my God, we're getting
Yes.
sugar, let's get more of it." So you actually have receptors that eat more because your brain, you have this lizard brain that still thinks famine's going to be around the corner.
Yeah. Yeah, so we got
And
to
that
store all that salt and stuff, the
yeah,
salt and
and
sugar and fats.
that's also a problem with the addictive personalities ADHD has. It can be drugs, it can be overeating, it can be sexual behavior like Tiger Woods. It can be thinking you can do more than what you can. We
And
see
you can
this
also be
recently in
addicted
the
to good
famous
things too.
Netflix, huh?
You can also be addicted to good things too.
And that's what you want to focus on.
Yeah.
Absolutely, whether it be sports or healthy thinking process and so on. But like this, JFK Jr. Flying in conditions that he shouldn't have been flying in and flying at night. That's typical ADHD behavior too, of overconfidence, high adrenaline activity, thinking you can get away with it, and so on. And of course, he kills his wife, sister-in-law, and himself. So this is something also to be mindful of all the time. That, like you said, make sure that your addictions and your hyper focus is a positive activity and
Where I
not
get in trouble
negative.
like that is driving cars.
It can be.
Driving vehicles with more confidence than I should. Like stomping into it at a red light because I'm trying to show off.
Well,
I could
excuse me for interrupting, but I think it's every 2 or 3 years your insurance company allows you to do a defensive driving course and it lowers your
really
premium.
I didn't I knew about the defensive driving course, but I didn't know it was like every 2 or 3 years we could
Yeah,
do it. And
you
I
can do it, and then you
yeah
tell them, and you show them the certificate, and they lower your premiums a little bit, and it also changes your mindset. So you need to
yeah
change your mindset. How are you going to do that? Some people just have a wife or a husband that's bickering in the passenger side, but trying to be more defensive and passive on the road can only serve you well, especially with people. The last 4 or 5 years, I can't get over the aggressive driving that I've been seeing in Dallas, Fort
yeah
Worth. People are angrier. They got to get to their place a lot quicker, but they're causing problems. I've never seen it before in my life. I've driven a lot in England. I've driven a lot and because I lived in England and I lived in Germany and I've obviously lived in America a long time. And it's only recently I'm just like, man, something's going on with the driving. We need more people just to be nice, let you in. Somebody needs to cut you off. Maybe, their wife just cheated on them. Let them go. Don't get
yeah
bent around the axle.
they don't think about like most people. I didn't think about it at during when I was having my moments, but you're essentially driving a 6,000 pound missile. You know, it's a weapon, and people need to be more aware of that and the things that and how precious life really is. About 5 years ago, I really started kind of noticing the same thing that you did. Like people are getting angry. A guy yelled at me at a stoplight and threatened to shoot me one time because I missed the light and he was honking at me, and I turned around and I was like, what do you want? And he's like, I'm gonna shoot you. And I just at that moment, I kind of made it. It wasn't too long before that we had a road rage incident nearby where a guy got shot. And at that moment, I made a conscious decision that I was going to, be easier around traffic and going around town. I noticed a lot of people's, speeding down our main thoroughfare and weaving in and out of traffic, but me driving normal will be caught at the same stoplight as this person. And when I started noticing that, I'm like, what the hell am I in a hurry for? Like, really, the building that I'm going to is going to be there in 5 minutes. So let's just slow down and take it easy. And I noticed when I started doing that, I actually got around a lot quicker.
And there's research out there showing that if you show kindness to somebody on the road, they're like not 90% more inclined when they have an opportunity to
To
show
be
kindness in
nice.
the future to do so.
Yeah.
So it is kind of like, we have these verbal viruses that go around that, when you and I were younger, people would say, or when I was younger, awesome, dude, and that spread out for a while, or totally rad, or things that, so these verbal viruses, if you will, they get out there in the populace that spread quickly. Hundreds of thousands of people suddenly are
Yeah.
saying it. Same same thing I think of like acts of kindness on the road.
That's very interesting because it is contagious. For years now, I've done this thing where I'll be out in public and somebody will ask me how I'm doing, and it's just one of those common, it really happens in America a lot, but somebody will ask you how you're doing and they don't really care what the answer is. It doesn't really matter to them. They're just
It's just a
being
way to say
nice.
hi and go on.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what I've been doing for the last several years now is when somebody asks me how I am, regardless of what the actual answer is, if I'm having the shittiest of shitty days, I will respond to them, wonderful. How are you? With genuine curiosity. I really genuinely want to know how their day is. It puts me in it gives me a better day even if I'm having the horriblest most horrible day I've ever had. Just that interaction and that noble lie, if you will, wonderful. Even though I'm doing very crappy, after that interaction, I'm up here instead of down here.
Hmm. Kind of reminds me, you bring memories back when I was in high school. Some of us were irritated by that. So when people would do that, we would actually answer honestly, like, I'm really having a hard time with my dad. Can I talk to you for a while? And people, just,
I'm one of those guys that would be absolutely tell me what's going on, man.
well, yeah, that would be cool, but most people are like, no, no, I just wanted to hear, I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Bye.
One of the favorite things my best friend he does this all the time when we go to like a restaurant or a grocery store or something and he's with me and the cashier or whoever says, have a nice day, he'll tell him, you don't tell me what to do. And it's so funny, and
Yeah.
he's not meaning it to be mean, and obviously we get lots of laughs when he does it, but it is funny. Like, you don't tell me what to do, and it just breaks up that monotony of their day, gives them something to smile about or whatever. But it's an awesome thing that he does. And one thing, like when we became best friends, he one time he told me, he's like, how I knew you were a good dude? And I was like, how? And he's like, down in the South, we have this test. And I don't remember what he called the test or whatever, but we were going through a drive-through one day and it was at McDonald's. And like nobody has really great experiences at McDonald's. They have decent experiences or good experience, but not really great experiences. Going through the drive-through, and I was very nice to the person taking the order. And when we get to the window, it was a very nice conversation or interaction. And he's like, I knew you were a good dude. And I was like, how or when? And he's like, when we were at that drive-through at McDonald's, he said, when you were nice to people that you didn't have to be nice to. And he's like, that is a true um, gauge on how a person really is. If you're nice to somebody that you don't have to be nice to, just because, it tells a lot about you. And I was like, man, that's awesome. I never really thought about it like that. But I look at all people, um, and I could be talking to the president of the United States. It doesn't really matter to me. I look at all people as just people, man. I don't see authority. I don't see um, jobs or anything like that as being like a judge. They're at the end of the day, when they take that robe off, they're a person just like me. They have a life just like me. They have kids. They have a home, and so that's kind of how I think about people when I interact with them.
Yep. My dad was very successful businessman when he was in a system, and he was vice president of human resources back when vice president meant something in the 70s and 80s of Southland Corporation, which was one of the largest companies in the S&P 500. They owned Southland, they owned 7-Eleven, Chief Auto Parts, Citgo Oil, Ready Ice, Dean Foods, Oak Farms. I mean, you get the picture. So there's like 70,000 employees in this system, and he helped organize a lot of that. And I remember one day he told me, he's like, always treat staff and the person who's the worker bee, the clerks and so on, with the utmost respect. You never know how, on one side, selfishly, they can hurt you later. And
Absolutely.
second of all, you never know what good that will create just showing them dignity in the job
Yes.
that they're doing. And my wife, I've always been very good with waiters and so on, trying to always be nice, having that in my back of my, because, a lot of times when I'm, these waiters, I'm thinking they probably don't want to be here forever.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and so they're doing this transitioning or whatnot, or they're struggling or they're going through college or whatnot. And my current wife's is she's always really impressed with how I treat, the waiters, just like what you're doing, whether it's McDonald's or whatnot. And that comes from my dad. And my grandmother used to always say, you can never go wrong being considerate,
Absolutely.
you know. Well, man, this has been great, Ricky. Thanks so
I
much for
agree.
having me.
I agree. Thank you for coming, man. And like I told you last time, I've had such a great time talking with you. As many times as we can get you on. Are you working on any other projects?
Well, I have this book that's coming out that if you think your listenership would be interested in learning about why do Jews reject Christianity?
Yeah, I
Because
yes,
yeah,
I'm interested already.
okay, so I've written a book called A Case Against Christ, where I document all the reasons why Jesus does not fulfill the Messiah promises of the Old Testament and of the Talmud, the oral Bible of the Jews. And then why a lot of his teachings are immoral and not in line with the Messiah, like hellfire and damnation if you don't believe in me and I'm a God.
Yes.
Yeah, if you next time if you want to hear in a week or two to go over that because that book's coming out this summer,
Hell
uh,
yeah, yeah.
we can talk
Yeah,
about that.
absolutely. When we hop off here, maybe we'll plan something, or I have your email so we can communicate
Yeah.
back and forth. But again, this has been a fantastic conversation. This is a great place to leave it. Everybody, so what is the name of
The,
your website so people can find you?
All right, thanks. So, as you see my name, Bryan Rigg, but it has my middle name in it. So it's Bryan Mark Rigg, and it's just, .com. So www. Bryan Mark with a K as in kilo, Rigg, RIGG.com. They can find all my books there. And then this book that we've been discussing today is called Conquering Learning Disabilities at Any Age, also under my name, Bryan Rigg, for those who would like to get it and read the footnotes and the study that I did for almost 30 years.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Bryan, it's been an awesome conversation. Hang out with me for just a minute. We'll let these guys go.
Hey,
Hey,
thanks, Ricky.
everybody. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Again, thank you for coming and hanging out with us. We'll be back next week with a new episode Coffee with Bearded Bad Dad with Bryan Mark Rigg, author and historian. We'll see you guys next time.